It's really nice to be here this afternoon. And Jim and Sunny had a joke at my expense, and that they said, "Do you mind presenting on on a Mac?" That's what I said. Can I connect my PC and do my PowerPoint? They said, "Well, actually, that's kind of difficult. We really like to use the PC that we had to present with, but it's a Mac." I said, "If you promise to show me if I get stuck anywhere in here, that you'll help me figure it out." And I laugh at that now. I've been at Microsoft for the last 10, 12 years, and the company's changed so dramatically. And it's actually much easier to not work in the mainstream, and much easier to work on the edges of where you think of Microsoft core technologies and operating systems and business productivity tools. And it's funny now to think about how we think of in terms of markets and competition. This last week, I guess we had a conference called Build in San Francisco, developer conference. We talked about all of our mobile platforms and Windows, the next generation Windows, all is going to run on Android devices, and this puts pressure on people like me to keep up with all the different devices. I already support all of the IT in my house, and it includes a lot of Apple products, but I'm not very good when it comes to operating any of the software on those products. So it's just a funny aside, but we're not here today to talk about this. The endpoint devices in this story. What we're really interested in is how companies like Microsoft can commit to being a carbon neutral operation, and how we make that work inside of a complicated organization with lots of different constituents with different business goals. But we have been able to coalesce around a business process fundamentally, that lets us enable a carbon fee where we run a carbon neutral operation. So let me start. I think the starting point for this is you have to understand that Microsoft believes in climate change. We think it's a serious issue that needs every part of society to pay attention to what's going on and work at ways to address climate change. So environmental sustainability as a part of our business plan is fundamental to the company and how it thinks. And we have three major components to environmental sustainability at Microsoft, and the first of those is enabling energy efficiency. So we do that in our software already. Like a lot of software that you use in Touch, you'll see energy management tools embedded in that software, but we're thinking about how does the software consume the resources on the device, and what's the energy footprint of that software as it consumes the different resources, whether it's running on a notebook or in a data center. So the software is very aware of the energy that it consumes. That's part of our QA process as we develop and ship software. We also are very aware of the carbon footprint and the energy consumed in data centers. We can talk more about that in a little bit. But we're working a lot, and I spend a lot of time with startups and what I would call industry business partners on software that enables energy efficiency. And I'm particularly interested in driving energy efficiency at scale across the built infrastructure, but looking across all the different systems that software can be used to drive that. And we'll talk about that for a little bit in the context of smart buildings. So the next piece of our strategy is to look inside of our research portfolio and see where there's opportunity to apply scientific research that's happening inside of Microsoft, whether it's on new energy generation, whether it's on forest ecosystems, or migration patterns in fish, and how climate change is affecting all of that. So we have a wealth of research happening inside the company with a big research department that has pretty much a wide open sandbox to go explore things that they're interested in. So going way beyond the typical boundaries of computer science. So there's a lot of interesting opportunity to pull that research in and use it towards solutions for sustainability. The third piece of this, and where we'll really define this carbon neutral strategy, implemented is in how we demonstrate environmental leadership and how we're a responsible citizen in terms of how we run our company. And just coincidentally, there were a couple of news items last week, and I don't expect anybody's really seen them because last week, the EPA, actually the week before, April 27th, the EPA came out and announced its top 100 green power partners. So these are the top purchasers of green power in the United States. And so you're essentially in the largest energy market, largest economy, and we are the #2 purchaser of green power in the United States, behind Intel significantly. And then there's a retailer, I think it's Kohl's, then Google, and then as you go down a few, there's Apple. But I thought it was gratifying to see the industry-leading technology companies, if you think of Google, Apple, Intel, Microsoft, all easily in the top 10 in terms of acquiring renewable power, green power. I thought that was a great statement by the industry overall. And so we're right in the middle of that. And if you add in the international projects that we're going to be adding into our portfolio, we're confident we're one of the top green power purchasers on the planet. So let's dig into that responsible citizenship, environmental strategy, and the simple way that we communicate that inside the company. Again, this is about business process and getting buy-in. So I mentioned our corporate culture leaning into sustainability. That's just part of our personality. I would say the average Microsoft employee is very aware of sustainability. So this simple be lean, be green, be accountable is a really interesting way for us to communicate that in actions that we take inside the company. Being lean, we're working hard to reduce energy consumption across all of our operations. So all of our corporate facilities, all of our data centers, which are really massive energy consumers, but we're also making our air travel really transparent to the user, to the customer. So when I travel for Microsoft, there is a statement that tells me how much carbon I've consumed and the cost of that carbon on my travel statement from American Express. So thinking that, you might want to use Skype instead of flying and having that meeting is something that's a common choice that we make in the company because of our awareness of our carbon footprint. And I mentioned that we work hard on driving energy management software, and applying that software to how we control energy in our own facilities. Talked about how we're buying green power. Really being green is a direct reference to the renewable energy projects that we're committing to. We're buying long-term contracts on wind. We've just done that in San Antonio and Chicago over the last couple of years, buying 20-year contracts, not unlike what Google has done around their data center. I remember their Iowa purchase being particularly a large one. So this is a common trajectory in the business, and it's our company putting its money where its mouth is. The accountability part of this is the most important, and it's what makes the carbon neutral strategy work. Because we've taken accountability for the carbon footprint that we all have in this business world, and we've landed that accountability on the P&L statement for the people running the businesses. And I have a quick an anecdote. In the course of my career at Microsoft, the time I've worked there, I've done a lot of interesting work. As Jim mentioned, I don't tend to work in anything mainstream. I've worked with a lot of partners. I was in a group that we call Developer and Platform Evangelism. And so we're out pushing new technology. Then I went from there to the sustainability team, and I worked for the chief strategist for sustainability. And I've never seen anybody move away from a business card more quickly than my one that said sustainability on it. And that's because in the business dialogue, people are concerned that you're just coming at them with an expense. This person doesn't have a business proposition as much as they want me to change my behavior in a way that's going to make me uncomfortable, right? So this accountability piece is so important because you build an economic interest into the organization that makes sustainability run. So I'll talk in a second in more detail about the carbon fee, but so we have a carbon fee that's set by a committee, but really the Office of the CFO and the finance team are the stewards of this conversation because we're talking about a lot of money that's getting invested and a lot of money that's being saved. So it seems that if you think of if I were going to walk into an enterprise, the first person I would need to buy in would be the CFO. That would be the person who would need to believe in this strategy. And as an interesting side note, as we developed this strategy in the sustainability team, we started with buy-in from the CFO's team and worked across that organization and got that team sold on the concept. By the time we got in front of the CFO, it was a quick conversation, and the conversation was packaged as one of it's a smart thing to do business-wise. It's a very solid risk mitigation strategy given the dynamics of doing business globally and the different policies in the different markets you're operating in, and the expectation that the larger the carbon footprint, the more expensive it is going to be for you to, the more expensive your business is going to be, on whole across global markets. So what we've done in the company is we've taken this carbon fee and we divide it up between, this is the COO's organization, sales, marketing, all the services and marketing. So these are the 5 big chunks of the company. Research, I mentioned. I'm not supposed to walk in front of the screen, I remember that. And our cloud computing group, which now includes all of the office products and all of the online services that are delivered. The operating system engineering group, and the device and solutions engineering, which is essentially, we used to call it the entertainment division. It's Xbox and all those properties, and now all the devices rest in that division. So all of those organizations understand on their profit and loss statement what their carbon footprint is, and the senior executives running that business will not, the way they run their business is on a P&L. And that's their target. They've got to operate their business within these constraints. So the minute you have a line item with a dollar number next to it, at the senior executive, they're going to start controlling that expense, and that's exactly what's happened inside of the company. So we instituted this, our carbon neutral policy on July 1, 2012. That's consistent with our fiscal year. Our fiscal year goes from July 1 to June 30. So we're closing out on our 3rd complete year of being a carbon neutral operation now. And when you run a business process in a company, first year is always the roughest, and getting a new business process launched and getting the change management in place and buy-in takes time. But as you make progress, it accelerates. So let's talk specifically. Sorry about that. This carbon fee is a really simple thing. So we started reporting into the Carbon Disclosure Project in, I think, around 2007. So the Carbon Disclosure Project, if you're not familiar with it, is a data repository that is driving all of the carbon footprint data for the top 2,000 companies in the world. And so I think a huge percentage of the Fortune 1000 is reporting into this. I think they really have most of the companies on board now. But since 2007, we hired a chief strategist for environmental sustainability that began to work in the company and work across the organization. And we started reporting our carbon footprint and started to establish modest goals in reducing energy consumption and trying to achieve carbon footprint reduction as you'd expect. So when you start reporting, we ended up with a good opportunity now to forecast our carbon footprint on an annual basis moving forward. 2007, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we have a really good handle now on our carbon inventory, where it's coming from, and now based on other plans, growth plans, where we're forecasting new data centers or new facilities that are going to shift that carbon footprint. It becomes a relatively easy thing to forecast. So you build a high confidence in your forecast, and then, okay, say we have our inventory. Now, let's figure out, after we do all our energy efficiency, look at all our existing renewable power, what is it going to take us to offset the rest of that carbon footprint? Because we can't meet it all. And so now we have a simple model where we can have a price per ton, but you basically have, here's all the costs it's going to take to offset against our inventory. So the simplicity is, it's a simple division problem. We end up with a price per metric ton that's under the market. I noticed last week, Jim and I were chatting about it, that Yale instituted a cap and trade plan to manage, as part of their energy management policy. And I noticed that I think the price, correct me if I'm wrong, was around $40 a ton, right? So
plus raising the interest rate over time.
Yeah, so in our internal carbon pricing is way beneath that, right? So you'll find it published. It's on the low side. It's between 6 and 7. Jim has the data. But what's happening too is the interest in offsetting that is now enriching the kind of projects that we would invest in. So there's internal pressure from the committee that's assembling the portfolio of investments that we use to offset our carbon footprint, and looking for, they're starting to advocate essentially for investments that may cost the company more. And that's okay. Now that we have a model in place, we can play with that carbon pricing a little bit. Since we've just gotten started on it, having the process and model locked in, I think, is the best possible outcome. And then as it changes over time and incremental gains become more difficult and the external market influences our internal market, so as we go out to invest in projects and buy RECs, those market prices will change too based on demand. So we're set up with a model that we're really comfortable with. We're meeting our target. We're delivering a carbon neutral operation on an annual basis now, and are pretty excited about how it's working. So I just talked about this, what our marketing team would call, we talk about a lot of technology like this. You create a virtual cycle. You create the momentum associated with this. So having a carbon fee investment fund and increasing the visibility will influence the price as you have increasing requests for funding. This covers all of our global operations, covers all of our data centers, and it covers the transportation. So our carbon footprint is generated from all of these assets, mostly the data center assets, all of the corporate assets that we have in terms of commercial buildings and some manufacturing plant and facilities, and then some what I would call closed-end transportation facilities around our campuses that just like here in the Bay Area, where Google and Facebook are commuting employees back and forth to San Francisco, we're doing the same from Redmond to Seattle. So the same kind of transportation, that's all part of our footprint in Seattle. And the same kinds of things apply in Europe, where company cars are very common. That's part of the carbon footprint. So I digress, but that virtuous cycle is what's in process right now. So this is where we're spending. This gives you a simple breakdown of what the spending looks like for the carbon fee that we're generating. no surprise that the lion's share of that is in green power and what we believe is the innovation, and I try and use that word carefully because every technology company embeds that multiple times in any presentation you'll see. But we're working with a number of new technologies, mostly around our data centers, but also in how we operate our own buildings, to look at where we can make investments that are going to move the needle on energy efficiency. More than 20% is spent on community projects globally that help accelerate low carbon economies. It could, typical ones you see, and I've got a really interesting video on how a community is managing forests in Africa right now. If we have time for it, it's fun to take it in. That's a great area for us to invest, but there's also interesting projects around cook stoves, typically in emerging economies, as well as basic insulation programs for lower income housing. And then we have a small percentage for managing the program and the business processes internally. So this is my recipe card. And when I went to visit Jim in his office in the building there's a nice recipe for the smart building in the stairwell. Try and walk up the stairs and not take the elevator, right? So so this is my recipe card, really essentially the Microsoft recipe for running a carbon neutral enterprise. So if you start with I have the steps of the process, the main ingredients and the steps to assembling that. So you have to know your carbon impact. This seems really obvious. However, doing a complete carbon emissions inventory is challenging at scale. So that is one of the first very large hurdles because you're going to make an investment as an enterprise to actually be able to implement software and systems that will help you automate that process. Because assembling your carbon inventory manually is just way too labor intensive, way too many phone calls. There are those phone calls and the slower parts of the process. So for example, what's the carbon footprint for this small office we have in suburban Bangkok? It's floor of a commercial building there. And so it takes a little legwork sometimes to find those pieces. That's where most of the non-manual, that's where most of the manual process is right now. But in large part, we've automated the process by which we do our carbon footprint. And I would suggest that as one of the fundamental things to do first. The other thing about this carbon footprint is you're transparent with it. You share it with the outside world, and everybody inside the company understands what their division's carbon footprint is. The second step is now, okay, we know our carbon footprint. What are we going to do about it? What's our policy to go after that? And if you're following our model, in conjunction with that, you're going to develop an investment strategy. So what are the things? How are we going to spend the money? Where are we going to spend this? Are we going to spend the lion's share of that internally and in bringing, in addressing that low-hanging fruit first that we have internally and mix it with a combination? Every company is going to take a different approach depending on their business. Intel, for example, who we talked about as the #1 green power purchaser, has a different problem than Microsoft. Sure, they're running data centers just like we are, but they're also are running semiconductor fabs, which are a completely different animals. So they would struggle with that problem in a different way. And then you determine your internal carbon price. And so this, when we first rolled this out, that was the thing that people thought was going to be the touchy part about it, because you're going to walk into a meeting full of executives who are already under a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver profitability. We're a public company, and you've heard this, the same comment from any public company in that, the ability to drive value for the shareholders is really what it's about. So it's about how profitable is your division, and how are you impacting the stock price? And when you come into that and say, we're adding another line item to the P&L, we expected a lot of pushback. But because of the buy-in from the CFO that I mentioned and the simple explanation, it's a risk mitigation strategy that will pay dividends because of the efficiency that you'll deliver across the business and your operations with this. So it was seen from the CFO's office as that net positive opportunity that then became really an item that the senior leadership would say, okay, we understand that, we'll buy into that. So that happened probably over, just to give you a feeling of the scale, that happened over a 6 to 9 month period. It's not a one-week conversation. It's all the typical communication that goes on when you move any initiative. In fact, doing something in less than a year that changes the business process is moving along very quickly. So that's the gaining approval, establishing governments, and then you're in the cycle and you're administering the fee and improving it and building momentum going forward. So our results over the last 3 years, very tangible. We've purchased a lot of green power, 10.2 billion kilowatt hours. Here we've reduced a lot of our, of carbon, 7.5 million metric tons, impacted a lot of people and saved a lot of money. So we are in a very positive momentum stage of this business process, and we're simply saying it's working well for us. These are some simple examples of projects we're investing in. These projects to accelerate both energy efficiency and low carbon economies. And I want to talk about 2 things specifically, and we'll touch on bigger things. But this is our campus in Puget Sound, and it's not as big a campus as the typical university. Universities really have the biggest campuses. This is one of the largest corporate campuses. Does anybody know off the top of their head how many millions of square feet are on the Stanford campus? I'm guessing it's close to 15 million, maybe, in that range. If you look across all the facilities on the campus and everything that Stanford owns in this area, this would be true of. I know it's true that UC Davis is larger than this. UC Santa Barbara, Berkeley, they all have a bigger footprint than we do. But the typical corporation doesn't have this kind of sprawling real estate. And this is just the Puget Sound environment. The important part of this is we're spending $60 million annually, and that's where energy is really cheap. So we're paying probably a third of what is paid out in California here. But we're able to save with this software that we're laying on top of our building management systems. We're able to save 6 to 10% of that. So that's and with a sub 24-month ROI. So that's the kind of check that our CFO will sign off on all the time, because we're saving anywhere from $4 to $6 million that goes straight to the bottom line by running efficient facilities. You've seen lots of dashboards probably on energy management. This is the real dashboard that our real estate, this is at the real estate executive level, so the management teams that are running this. And it has the clever speedometer for how many megawatts the campus is consuming at a given point in time. It has the status. Buildings doing well have a green arrow going up. The buildings with the red arrow going down have problems that need to be addressed. And this simple little pie chart is something that our facilities engineering team absolutely loves, because it used to take a mechanical engineer probably 4 weeks at the end of every quarter, maybe a little bit less than that, but to go across all the systems and roll up the base load, the plug load, and the lab load for all that's happening there. Now this is a real-time report coming out of the system. There's lots of new technology in the market doing these very similar things. What I like about what we've done, the blue line, by the way, is the outside temperature, and you're looking at the base load there. There's a plug load example, so you can drill in to the details here. But here's where there's a big change in how facilities are typically managed and how you really drive energy savings at scale. You can't tackle the problem in a serial fashion and manage your facilities on a calendar basis. It takes 5 years to cycle through 150 buildings in that mode, and that's how most facilities are still managed today. You have to start automating the systems and finding the problems. So you can see that there's a green key system here, and this simple key tells you that you've got electricity running to that building, you've got backup generation that's been tested, and in green, that's the generation status. You've got communications open, then you have alarms and faults. Alarms are if the lights went out in this room, that's an alarm. If something's not, so that's a problem that needs to be fixed immediately. But where the money is in saving energy and delivering ROI is in the faults, where you're using a conditional maintenance, methodology, and you're running algorithms in the software that tell you whether any piece of equipment is not tuned properly and is running out of tune. So you can begin to predict where a piece of equipment is going to fail. In this case, this is a relatively small chiller that's leaking, and on an annualized basis, that's a $1,500 problem. So the way that facilities might typically be run, and I know Stanford is running much more state-of-the-art, and you can tell by the building you're sitting in, but globally, you have people often fixing a $10 problem when down the hall there's a $1,000 problem. But because these problems aren't being tracked and built into business processes, you're not able to really get after the problem. So this type of system, we like to say, makes the invisible visible. So this is an energy consumption curve for 7 days a week. You can see the top of each spike is a day. This is for a large commercial building that's sitting on, if you know the Seattle area, sitting on 405 in Bellevue. It's right on the highway. It's got a big Microsoft logo. It's 25 or 30 stories, and it's about 500,000 square feet. And you know there's a problem here. What's this big spike? You wouldn't turn on all the systems at one time anyway. That's just bad practice, which you discover a lot of that when you run this software anyway. But it turns out that there's the midday, and this peak is actually happening at midnight. And when you look into the problem, you find nobody's in the building. Janitorial crews, everybody who is maintaining that building is gone. But the building management system had a setting that somehow it had a mistake in the settings. It turned on all the systems at midnight, brought the building up to 80 degrees, and then shut everything off. So and we laugh at that problem, but that happens a lot in building automation system. And literally, it's a 30-second fix. You know, you have to go to the console and say, oh my God, look at this setting is off in this building. I think the same building is cursed because we had another incident with the same building where there was a sewage problem. There's a huge parking garage underneath. They turned on all the exhaust fans to clear out the air, which smelled bad, and forgot about it for 3 months. And so the energy spend there is literally in the tens of thousands. It's $20,000, $30,000 of energy spend that you don't have to have. But you see this all the time. And so when you turn on these systems, you find that often everybody's comfortable. There's no alarms in the building, but you're simultaneously heating and cooling at the same time. This is a common problem with systems that are set up today. So you're expending way more energy than you have to. So we're deploying this same system. We've deployed it this last year at our Silicon Valley campus right here on 101. We're running the software. And this is this is our facilities energy footprint that does not include our data centers. You can see we have big operations. Oh my gosh, I didn't shut off my phone. It's terrible. How could it be 4? How much time? I go till 5:10 or 4 minutes. Okay, that's good. We're almost, yeah, I don't want to bore people either. So we have big operations in around the world. You guys are much smarter probably about data centers than I am. I think this is such an interesting science. But we apply the same methodology. In fact, we had an argument with the data center team because they're doing custom software internally, and it would be great to get more of this out. Let me shut off my phone. This person is not going to leave me alone. So we're applying the same type of dashboard in a data center as you would expect. But the good news for the industry is I think there's a strong camaraderie around anybody who runs a data center. So we talk to Google, we talk to Facebook, we talk to Amazon, and people who are running data, we're using the same contractors, we're using the same OEMs, and we're pushing the standards in there. I mean, there's some really funny stories, and just you go back not too long ago, and the argument in the industry was, why does this have to run at a fixed temperature between 70 degrees and 80 degrees when you can, I've got a PC that's sitting in my closet where it must be 130 degrees and it's running fine. It doesn't care. So the specifications on the hardware side of this are really being pushed to the limit now for a wide tolerance on how the systems perform. So the costs are coming out of the physical equipment, and what people are after now is how do you move beyond the data center efficiency, behind making that hardware efficient to improve sustainability. Well, it's in the distributed power generation. How do you deliver new energy projects to the grid that help that help in that to help feed that data center? And what's the next generation energy technology? Moving right along. We talked about wind a lot today, really common. We have big contracts in San Antonio and Chicago. This is a really fun project because we're taking wastewater treatment plant. This, many of you might know, is the data center. And you can see the product logos on it. But this is what a typical data center looks like now. It's not a building anymore. It's a shipping container. And a typical data center isn't an air-cooled room in a big building. It's a concrete slab warehouse sitting out in an industrial district. Hopefully it's a climate where you open the windows. And the IT packs come in on trucks and they look like shipping containers. They might have a Dell or Intel logo on them or no logo at all. You drop them in, you plug them in, and they run. And this is football fields of these 40-foot containers. That's a typical, I think that's a Gen 3 or Gen 4, I can't keep track, data center right now. But in this, as many of you may know, where the issue in electricity from between the generation where it's actually consumed is the loss in transmission and distribution. And the notion that you can integrate data centers into the power supply as a closed system is a really good one, especially the excess heat coming out of that data center feeds back into the wastewater system to continue the biogas project there. These are areas where we're purchased green power. You can find a lot of that online. And here, so most of that's the United States, most of the green power, but as I mentioned, we're starting to invest more internationally. And these are the projects that I mentioned where we've really impacted millions of people. Most of those are spread across what we would consider the developing world, but a mix across North and South America, Africa, and China. So we have a video, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So the video you can file, I can point it to you. If you want to send me an email for whatever reason, it's really easy to remember my email. I'm Bill M at Microsoft. And don't ask me how I got that Bill M address, because there was a Bill G address in there too. And so if you think it's just not Bill G, it's Bill M, Bill Mitchell. And that's easy enough, so you can send me an email and I can get you connected to any information that you've seen. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Bill. The standard policy is students first in questions, and then we'll talk to the rest of us here who still consider ourselves students, but we're just not paying tuition anymore. Anyway, student questions. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. I find it really laudable that Microsoft is putting a price on carbon internally, and also smart looking forward, because a lot of
It's old, I think. Some people can maybe. And I'll move this around for those people I can reach.
I also think it's very smart financially, because a lot of the nations where you operate will eventually have a price on carbon.
Right.
You mentioned that the internal carbon price is much lower than what most academics would suggest, and also that's determined by the CFO. And so I'm wondering if you think it's all right to have your internal price so much lower, and also if the CFO is really the right person to be setting that price.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think from our point of view, it's not just the CFO, but it's a committee. And the best way for us to actually be carbon neutral, which was really important to the sustainability team, was to package the solution in a way that it wouldn't that wouldn't come across with a debatable price point. Because the worst thing you could do inside of Microsoft is actually start a debate, because it might never end. Because like a lot of organizations, there's always somebody in the room who's done more homework, done more research, and you end up extending the discussion longer than you'd like to. We ran into that because our first run at a policy was a cap and trade type of scenario, and from our point of view, the business process that would put on the individual business owners in the company would have been cumbersome and almost threatening, and would have had a lot of questions. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? Why do we have to be carbon neutral? Can't we just take a piece of that and go from there? So it was done to expedite the end result. But our opinion is that the price is subject to market forces, just like anything else. And our ability to go out and purchase the offsets has a big influence on what the internal price ends up being. So,
Let me ask you one question just to tighten this down a little bit. Does the price correspond roughly to the average price you have to pay for offsets, or is it much lower than the average price you have to pay? Average or marginal price you have to pay for offsets?
I can't. I started looking at that, and I didn't get far enough on that, because I became curious when I was thinking about this. And we buy a lot of our green power offset projects from Sterling Planet, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it seems they're a big player in here. So I could do some more homework on that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, because one notion of optimization is if you're trying to reduce the cost of the offsets, you would set it equal to your marginal price of offsets. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, other questions, students? No students have any questions? Okay, it's open to everybody. Yes, and if you can speak loud enough, I won't bring this out.
So, Bill, what elements of your system, your process, do you feel is transferable to a national carbon pricing system? Any aspects of it, any philosophies of it, and if so, do you have a belief in terms of what is the best way to go from that point of view?
I think what we're doing is something that, frankly, every enterprise should be doing. So, as a corporation, understanding all your costs and then burdening the organization accordingly with those costs. Just like you pay for an employee's overhead in a distributed office space, you want the organization to be, you want the endpoint in the organization to be burdened with the full cost of having that. So I think immediately that the corporate enterprise marketplace should be one that would adopt this aggressively. It's easy for me to say because I don't have my business is less energy intensive, although that is changing also with the data center dependence that any technology, and especially a Microsoft, has. I mean, we're sure we're running one of the top 3, or we're definitely in the top 5 of anybody who's running a data center right now. I think government's more complicated, inherently more complicated. So I see this as a more commercial industry approach to it. I think government might adopt elements of it within their own operational infrastructure, but in terms of imposing a policy, I don't know.
Question over there.
I'm raising my Microsoft phone.
Excellent.
How do you work with external certification agencies, external auditors, and so on to disclose this kind of information?
Well, I imagine, I mentioned we published to Carbon Disclosure Project, and I don't know off the top of my head who our auditing firm is, our accounting firm, but all this is published as part of our annual report and goes through and all the data goes through the same scrutiny that all of our annual report data goes through. But I don't know. So it's audited, tracked, and verified. But I can't tell you exactly who's on the certifying end of it.
Way in the back, in the blue shirt.
So if I run a division that produces a lot of emissions, I'm being assessed a lot of money, right?
Right.
What control do I have over then how that money is spent to, let's say, reduce emissions from my division?
So what you would do is you would come forward with an energy efficiency project for your division, or a suggestion, or if you had more creative suggestion in how you might leverage renewable generation in your operation, that would go under consideration of the committee. So you definitely would have a seat. You have a seat at the table in that discussion. So you or members of your team are in there. But I think this points to a really important part of it. It's that discussion is a transparent one inside the company. Everyone needs, that's best way to run a company and share best practices. You hear how other people are lowering their carbon footprint and be able to apply it to your business as well.
Microsoft has been in the news lately about the Xbox and energy inefficiencies of the Xbox,
Correct.
especially in standby mode.
Yeah.
What kind of tools do you guys have to get divisions to produce products that are energy efficient?
I noticed that you came in at the very end, right? Or no, halfway through? I'm kidding. But when I started talking about energy efficiency, so in our software process, that code is scrubbed, and part of the QA in that cycle is energy efficiency and how it consumes resources. I know the issue you're talking about with Xbox, and I don't know it really well, but I know it's somewhat arm's length. But as I understand it, the way we ship Xbox in the United States is the power settings are full on by default. Whereas the rest of the world, where we ship in Europe, the power saving features are all enabled out of the box. So it's a marketing strategy in the company, and one that has been debated. So I won't defend it here on the floor here, but let's say that's the corporate environment we live in, and they would argue that the user experience that they're looking for, and they've publicized that the users have the option to do that, but they've made it the user has to go to that setting and lower their own footprint on the box.
But the users have the option.
Absolutely.
To do it.
Yeah.
But as we know, for most things, whether you opt in or opt out makes a fundamental difference.
I completely agree.
But it looks like you have good mechanisms in place for energy efficiency of your divisions themselves, the operating efficiency. But is there anything you can do to, get them more aware of energy efficiency of the products that they actually ship?
Oh, there's an awareness for sure. They're paying all their operations is paying for their own carbon footprint. In this case, it's more of a decision of how they've configured that product as it ships, and they say, okay, we're going to let the user set that up. So I can say that I personally don't agree with that policy, but I understand why they made that decision.
Right front here.
What sort of demands are you making on your suppliers to have a carbon footprint and to have their
We're moving down that path right now.
How levels are you?
Yeah, so we don't. So right now we don't have a big supply chain by the nature of our business, with the exception of where we're manufacturing an Xbox, which is a relatively small part of our business. But we have just this last year acquired the Nokia. All of the handset assets, the phone assets of Nokia. So and they actually have had an extensive environmental sustainability program in place too. But we're in the process now of integrating that into our big picture. That's all being rolled up as part of our carbon footprint. I think, maybe we'll catch part of that in this fiscal year ending June 30th. But next year, definitely, that will be rolled in, and we'll take the same mitigation strategy out to that supply chain as well. We don't, the company I admire most in that category is another company that tends to drive opinion one way or the other, and is Walmart. I think has done a really amazing job of putting pressure on their supply chain around sustainability and efficiency.
I saw another hand up there.
Are the nuclear plants considered within your green power entity, and are there many up in the area of Microsoft in Washington?
No.
I asked you 2 questions.
Yeah, I know. I think the answer is no to both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I think it's no and no, but I needed to check on that because
Whoops. Remember old whoops, Washington Public Power
Well, that's
System.
what I know.
That had its whoopsie.
In fact, that's one of the reasons that's pointed to as to why there's such an attitude about sustainability in the state of Washington in general, Seattle specifically, because the fact that they shut down their nuclear generation years and years ago and have always had an attitude about driving efficiency and conservation of energy.
In fact, they shut it down before the plant was completed, leading to the largest municipal bond default in the history of the world. But that was what they called whoops. Anyway, we have time for one last question, right in the very back there.
Clearly different business divisions have different carbon footprints.
Yep.
Could you describe the politics of the internal carbon tax among different managers? Are there some groups that are more enthusiastic than others, or how do you deal with that issue of fairness?
There's actually a relatively large group. I don't think there's a lot of contention. I think the gentleman in the back row already pointed out the one business that kind of sits outside of a lot of our core business is the game console part of our business, because mostly the DNA of the company is in. Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. The Xbox division. The Xbox division. But anyway, so I can't point to any significant issues there. I mean, there were a lot of low-level discussion about what's going to, in Europe. What about my corporate car? Does this mean I have to have a, cheap, fuel-efficient car? And all that. It's the individuals that tend to worry about how it might change their lifestyle in the company. But that was more what I would call just the noise level as you go through changing a business process. So I don't have any specific comment, except that the transparency has just been fundamental to making it all work. So everybody knows what everybody's carbon footprint is inside the company.
Well, thank you. We have to bring this to that. And I particularly like the candid view of what's happening in a big, highly respected company that is trying to lead to energy efficiency and carbon reductions. Thank you. This has been very, very valuable.
Yeah, thanks. My pleasure.